What I'm saying is, why should physics have the monopoly on our ontology? What's the argument for that, given the epistemology and the psychology that you're advancing here? It seems to me like our ontology is much more rich than our current physics is capable of incorporating. That's what I'm trying to get at. For example, you said you're not as stable as the cup. Well, you sort of have to be. I mean, there has to be a continuity in you. There's a right. As I move around the object, it's not just that I have to find a continuity in the object. There has to be a continuity in me as a knower in order for the stability of that object to be possible. I also have to have some kind of continuity. I'm trying to get at because sorry. We got into this, and maybe we both have taken each other too far afield. We got into this because I asked you to, like, what you were dealing with, the dualism problem that Descartes gave us, and then you said there isn't a problem because it's all sort of. I heard you saying sort of all constructed in the mind, but then if it's all constructed in the mind, so is all the things and all the tools by which we do the physics. I would be. Let's use your analogy. The physics I wouldn't trust the physics I'm doing in a dream if I knew it was a dream. And if I know it's a simulation, which you were claiming, why should I trust the physics that are occurring within that simulation? It seems to me that there is an ontology richer than physics that is needed in order to make the kind of arguments you're making.
So, first of all, don't worry. You don't need to apologize for taking us too far afield. I can take us back. It's no issue if we feel that we are going too far out here. There are two ways in which I can experience physics. One is in a lucid dream, for instance. I can test whether I'm in a dream or not, usually, for instance, by operating a light switch. I found that in lucid dreams, light switches, for the most part, don't work. Yeah. It's a funny thing, but they don't. Another thing is when you read text on a page, it's difficult to read the same text twice. You might have noticed this in dreams, right? And this seems to be a limitation of the way in which our working memory works. So I suspect that the lucid dream has to store all its state in working memory. And the causal structure that is stable in the dream has to be held there. And there's a limit to how many bits can be held in our working memory. And as a result, the complexity of the physics simulation in our own dream is limited. And this means that when we want to have a physics simulation that is more detailed, we probably need to have state that is stored outside of our mind for practical reasons. It's not a philosophical argument. It's just practical observation. So if you want to experience a world in which light switches work, you need to store some state outside of your working memory in some substrate that is outside of your mind, and this could be a physical room. So for practical purposes, if you ever find yourself in the situation that you need to figure out whether you are dreaming this or not, you could try to rely on processes in your environment to test for the existence of process environment that you need to update a lot of state to be stable, and you check for the stability of the state. Of course, there could still be some kind of conspiracy going on. So this is not foolproof. If an evil scientist is messing with you, then the evil scientist might be able to change your memories of what just happened, and or might be interjecting weird things in there. But the question that we want to answer on the other level is there a conspiracy going on? And the idea that is underlying physics is not complicated assumptions about the notion of energy, time, space, and causality, and so on. These are all things that we infer at some level. They're not assumptions that we need to presuppose to make physics work. The basic assumption in physics is maybe there is no conspiracy. Maybe this is just mechanical. And we have to understand why that is the case. And the idealist assumption is there is a conspiracy. We do live in a simulation. And this idealism is not solving anything in a way that physics is not solving it. You still have to, if you want to explain what's going on, make a claim that you now understand how the universe works, how that conspiracy could possibly work. Sure. And explaining the conspiracy is intrinsically harder if you deny the possibility of any kind of physics, and physics just being the mechanical explanation.
I'll come back to the point of I don't know if we infer certain things or our inferences presuppose them. We can come back to that in a minute. But I mean, we're in a position, at least that's what I hear you saying, different from Descartes, right? Person being, beset by the Cartesian demon, because I hear you saying, I know that I'm in a simulation, which is precisely what can't happen. So I agree. I'm excluding the Cartesian demon because, as you say, there's no way out of that well, right? If I doubt my capacity, I'm doubting whether or not my doubt, like you can just fall forever and ever. I get that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is though, but we're not in that. You seem to be saying, and I think I agree with you. We're not in that position. We can come to see what is it about our consciousness and our perception that is not real. But for me, that means that our consciousness and our perception and our intelligence also have access to reality, have an ability to pick up on what's real, because that would be the only thing I could use to contrast with like my subjective experience, right? In order to say I know that I'm inside something, I have to be able to give you good reason for believing there's something outside of me, right? And that outside of me also has to have access. And I'm not saying direct access. I'm not a naive empiricist. It has to have access to my consciousness and my reason or my intelligence. Or again, I can't actually posit the very model that I'm using to say that everything is a projection.
Yeah, so if we try to understand the situation, to me it's very it's almost inescapable to be in a similar situation as a robot living inside of some kind of computer, and this computer is set up in such a way that it provides affordances to an external environment, and now the computational system that lives inside of that computer, this set of organized patterns that we call software, is set up in such a way that it can discover regularities in the patterns and extend its affordances into this environment, and thereby make sense of the environment. And it seems to me that I find myself in an arrangement that is indistinguishable from this description, that is intimately familiar to me if I'm an AI researcher.
Right. I guess the question I'm asking you in your example, is it possible for the robot to discover that it is inside the computer?
Yes, I think it is. But there are certain limitations to this. And I think that you can discover this from, in a sense, from first principles, because there are no alternatives. There are many ways in which you can map this conceptually. So the ways in which you depict these entities, because they are not entities that are defined by physical appearances. They're not defined by res extensa. They're defined by certain conceptual relationships. And it turns out that all the ways, I think, in which a mind can exist as an apparent pattern and a control structure can be mapped structurally in first principles on conceptual structures that are equivalent. So we might disagree about how this computer is set up. Is it a von Neumann architecture or anything else? And there is no possible way to distinguish them, and there's no claim to this how this actually works. We know that the biological systems that are able to process information work in dramatically different ways from the technological systems that we have built to process information and so on. And we don't have disagreement about this. But we also know that there is at a certain deep conceptual level an equivalence of what they can do.
I agree with that. And so now it's what it sounds like you're saying is the most real things are the things that are sort of accessible to my a priori reason, and that's what I use in order to determine I'm within the welter of experience, and I use my a priori ability to make sense of things, and that helps me sort through and sift through those that are going to let me know that I'm inside a simulation. And then that says to me that what's ultimately real for you, and you invoked archetypes at one point when you talked about the cup. You're sounding to me like a Platonist. You're sounding to me like you're saying what's ultimately real are sort of the mathematical objects accessible through a priori reality, and everything else is less real than them. And is like, I mean, Plato has the first simulation theory around. You're inside the cave and you're only looking at the shadows, and the echoes, and you have to make your way out. Is that a fair reading?
Almost. I think that an archetype is an optimum in a description function. It's in some sense a mathematical regularity, in the same sense as the Greek gods are archetypes, personality archetypes. They're basically, if you take a space of personality properties and their interaction, right, they interact with each other, and you basically find settings of the dials that give you one personality that is as clear as possible.
Sure.
Given these assumptions, you end up with one of these archetypes, and that's how the Greek gods are stable in this way. Or the Christian god is the archetype of the total god.
Yeah.
And it's a particular one because this thing needed to be loaded to be also a civilizational spirit for an agricultural society. So it's not actually the total god, and there's a sleight of hand that is going on by identifying the creator god with the god of meaning and with the god of the late Roman Empire, right? So these are different gods in a certain way that have been put into one for practical reasons. And the reason why we have so many claims to total gods is because of this payload that the myth of the total god has to carry. But this doesn't mean that the archetype actually exists out in the physical world. There is no reason why, when you have a description function and you discover an optimum on it, why this thing needs to exist. But it will exist in systems that build these types of models, which means they exist as a point of reference. There are certain optima in which you describe things. And that's also true for our own perception. When we perceive things, what we perceive is not the features in which they are arranged. What we perceive is a certain ideal that is being projected by the features.
That's very Platonic.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is what Platonism means. It doesn't mean a claim to the actual existence of physical things, of affairs in the world with which we causally interact. It's the observation that when we are building models of the world, there are certain models that are more pure and more elegant than others, right? And this is, in some sense, the Platonic idea.
If you enjoyed this Toe clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for Toe Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core Toe community. You'll also receive my top 10 toes. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.